At 10:47 a.m. on February 8, 1943, Captain Paul Pappy Gunn stood on the flight line at Port Moresby Airfield in New Guinea, watching Lieutenant Edward Martinez's B-25 Mitchell disappear into the morning sky. Martinez was 24 years old, Los Angeles, 6 combat missions against Japanese convoys, 0 hits. The Japanese had learned to scatter their ships the moment they spotted American bombers at altitude. Martinez would be attacking from 15,000 feet, giving the Japanese convoy at least 4 minutes warning, plenty of time to maneuver, plenty of time for their anti-aircraft guns to track his approach. Gunn had been working on B-25's for 8 months. He knew the aircraft inside and out. Twin-engine medium bomber, 5-man crew, designed for precision bombing from altitude. Fast in a straight line, heavily armed for defense, could carry 3,000 pounds of bombs. But the B-25 had one fatal problem that was killing American pilots every single day. It couldn't hit moving targets. The doctrine was clear. Fly at 15,000 feet, drop bombs on Japanese ships. Use the Norden bomb sight for precision. The training manual said the Norden could drop a bomb in a pickle barrel from 3 miles up. Martinez had tried that doctrine 5 times. It hadn't worked. The Japanese ships saw the bombers coming, had 4 full minutes to maneuver while the bombs fell. By the time the bombs reached sea level, the ships were somewhere else. The 5th Air Force had lost 37 B-25's in the past 6 weeks trying to hit Japanese convoys. Most were shot down by anti-aircraft fire during their slow, predictable bombing runs. The survivors came back with 0 hits, watched their bombs explode harmlessly in empty water, while the Japanese ships steamed away untouched. Gunn had watched too many pilots die. Good men. Kids, really. They climbed into their B-25's following doctrine and came back in boxes or didn't come back at all. The training manual said the problem was pilot error. The instructors said these pilots weren't following proper bombing procedures. But Gunn knew better. The problem wasn't the pilots. The problem was physics. From 15,000 feet, a bomb took 42 seconds to fall. In those 42 seconds, a ship traveling at 12 knots moved 840 feet, more than the length of 2 football fields. Even with the Norden bomb sight, even with perfect calculations, the Japanese had time to see the bombs coming and turn. The hit rate for B-25's against moving ships was 5%. 1 bomb in 20 actually struck its target. Martinez had mentioned this to Gunn 3 days ago, said he felt helpless up there, watching his bombs miss while anti-aircraft fire tore through his formation. Gunn had told Martinez to be patient. He was working on something. Martinez took off at 10:47 that morning. Gunn watched the B-25 climb to altitude, watched it head northwest toward the Japanese convoy reported off Rabaul. Martinez never came back. The radio transmission came at 1320 hours. Martinez's B-25 had been hit by anti-aircraft fire during the bombing run. The aircraft went down in flames over the Bismarck Sea. No parachutes observed. All 5 crew members presumed killed. The official report noted 0 hits on the Japanese convoy before Martinez was shot down. Gunn walked to the maintenance hangar that evening and looked at the remaining B-25's on the line. Identical aircraft, identical armament, identical limitations. And he thought about Martinez. 24 years old, dead because he followed doctrine. Dead because his bombs took 42 seconds to fall. Dead because the B-25 was being used wrong. That night, Gunn made a decision that would change how Americans fought the air war in the Pacific. He was going to break every regulation in the Army Air Force Maintenance Manual. The first pilot Gunn lost was actually Captain James Pearson. February 25, 1943. Pearson was from Detroit, 28 years old, married with 2 kids. He'd been in theater for 4 months. Gunn had worked with Pearson on flight planning. They talked about the B-25's limitations. Pearson was frustrated. He'd flown 8 missions against Japanese ships. 0 hits. He told Gunn the bombing runs felt suicidal. Fly straight and level at altitude while the Japanese shot at you. Drop bombs that never hit anything. Hope you survived long enough to get home. On February 25th, Pearson's flight attacked a Japanese transport near Finchhofen. Standard doctrine. 15,000 feet. Norden bomb site. The Japanese ship maneuvered. All bombs missed. Pearson's B-25 took heavy anti-aircraft fire on the bombing run. Lost an engine. Couldn't maintain altitude. The aircraft came down in the jungle, 40 miles from Port Moresby. The crash killed everyone aboard. The official report noted mechanical failure due to combat damage. Recommended continued adherence to high-altitude bombing doctrine. Gunn attended Pearson's memorial service. Stood in the back. Listened to the chaplain talk about sacrifice and duty. All Gunn could think about was that Pearson had died for nothing. 0 hits on the target. 5 men dead trying to execute a tactic that didn't work. By late February 1943, Gunn had watched 17 pilots die trying to bomb Japanese ships from altitude. The doctrine wasn't working. Everyone knew it. The pilots knew it. The crew chiefs knew it. But nobody was authorized to change it. Except Pappy Gunn wasn't the kind of man who waited for authorization. Gunn wasn't supposed to be in the Army Air Force at all. He was 43 years old in December 1941. Too old for combat. He'd already done his time. 20 years in the Navy as an aviation mechanic and pilot, retired in 1939 as a chief petty officer. He'd moved to the Philippines in 1939, started flying rich Filipinos around in a Beechcraft, convinced them to start an airline. By 1941, he was chief pilot and operations manager of Philippine Airlines. He had a wife, Polly, 4 kids, Connie, Julie, Paul Jr., and Nathan. They lived in Manila. Good life. Peaceful. Then Pearl Harbor happened. December 7th, 1941. The Japanese attacked. The Philippines would be next. Gunn knew it. On Christmas Eve 1941, he was ordered to fly high-ranking officers to Australia in his Beechcraft. He gave Polly all his military pay, told her to tell the Japanese he'd died in a plane crash if they asked. Told her he'd come back for them. He never came back. The Japanese invaded Manila in January 1942. Polly and all 4 kids were captured, interned at Santo Tomas University, a civilian prison camp in Manila. They would stay there for 3 years. Gunn tried to rescue them. On his way back from Australia, he flew into Japanese-controlled airspace, attempting to land at Zamboanga to pick up stranded pilots. A Japanese float plane spotted him, shot up his Beechcraft. Gunn crashed, played dead. The Japanese flew past, left him for killed. He survived, made it back to Australia. His family didn't. The Army Air Force commissioned him immediately, Captain Paul Gunn, assigned to the 5th Air Force under General George Kenney, given a title, Special Projects Officer. It meant Gunn could do whatever he wanted as long as it killed Japanese. He wanted to kill a lot of Japanese, because somewhere in Manila, locked behind barbed wire in Santo Tomas prison camp, his wife and 4 children were starving. And every Japanese ship that made it through to resupply enemy forces in the Philippines meant Polly and the kids stayed prisoners longer. Gunn took it personally. The problem was obvious to anyone who understood physics and aircraft. B-25 Mitchells were medium bombers, designed to attack fixed targets from altitude, factories, rail yards, airfields. They were not designed to attack ships. Ships moved. The Norden bombsight could calculate lead angles, could compensate for wind and altitude and aircraft speed, but it couldn't compensate for a target that saw you coming and turned. The Japanese had figured this out by early 1943. When they saw American bombers at altitude, they simply maneuvered. Zigzag patterns, course changes every 30 seconds. By the time the bombs fell, the ships were gone. American doctrine said to bomb from 15,000 feet, high enough to stay above most anti-aircraft fire, high enough for the Norden bomb sight to work properly. But from 15,000 feet, the Japanese had all the time in the world to dodge. The obvious solution was to fly lower, get close, release bombs from low altitude where the Japanese had no time to react. But that created a different problem. At low altitude, you were inside the effective range of every anti-aircraft gun on the ship. 40mm cannons, 20mm cannons, even machine guns. They'd tear you apart before you could line up a bombing run, unless you could suppress those guns before they could shoot you. Gunn had an idea. Instead of trying to bomb ships from altitude, what if you flew straight at them at low level, shot up their anti-aircraft positions with machine guns, then dropped bombs from point-blank range? You'd need a lot of forward-firing guns, enough to overwhelm the ship's defenses, enough to kill the gunners before they could kill you. The B-25 had 1.30 caliber machine gun in the nose, fired by the bombardier, useful for scaring people, not much else. Gunn wanted 8.50 caliber machine guns, all firing forward, all firing simultaneously, 6,000 rounds per minute combined, enough firepower to saw a ship in half. The problem was that the B-25's entire nose was made of glass. The bombardier sat up there with the Norden bomb sight, navigating and dropping bombs. The glass nose weighed about 800 pounds, housed 2 crew members, and couldn't mount machine guns. Gunn's solution was simple. Remove the glass nose entirely, replace it with metal, mount 8.50 caliber machine guns in the nose, pointing forward. Let the pilot fire all of them at once from a trigger on the control yoke. Turn the B-25 from a bomber into a flying gun platform. The problem was that this violated approximately 24 regulations. You couldn't modify aircraft armament without authorization from Wright Field, the Army Air Force's engineering headquarters. You couldn't remove structural components like the nose without airworthiness certification. You couldn't change the crew configuration without updated training manuals and procedures. Most importantly, you couldn't take an expensive bomber and turn it into something the bomber wasn't designed to be. Gunn didn't care. He'd watched 17 pilots die following regulations. He wasn't going to watch more die while he waited for some engineer in Ohio to approve a modification request. In August 1942, without telling anyone, Gunn started building his first Strafra. Gunn didn't work on a B-25 first. He started with an A-20 Havoc, a smaller attack bomber. The hangar at Port Moresby was hot during the day, humid at night, smelled like aviation fuel and tropical rot. Gunn worked after 2,300 hours, when most of the maintenance crews were asleep. Just him and a few trusted mechanics who knew how to keep their mouths shut. The A-20 he chose had already been damaged in combat. The glass nose was cracked from anti-aircraft fire, needed replacement anyway. Nobody would notice if he replaced it with something different. First step, remove the glass nose entirely. Took 4 hours with cutting torches and wrenches. The nose came off in sections, pieces of plexiglass and aluminum framework. The bombardier station disappeared, leaving an open cavity in the front of the aircraft. Second step, fabricate a metal nose. Gunn used aluminum sheeting from wrecked aircraft, cut it to shape, welded it together, reinforced it with steel brackets. The new nose was heavier than the glass one, but stronger, bulletproof. Third step, mount the guns. Gunn had been collecting .50 caliber machine guns from crashed aircraft for months. He had 8 working guns, salvaged from wrecks, cleaned, test-fired, ready to install. The problem was mounting them. Each .50 caliber machine gun weighed about 65 pounds. 8 guns meant 520 pounds of armament. They needed solid mounting brackets, Needed to be aligned so they'd converge at a specific range. Needed ammunition feed systems. Needed electrical connections for firing. Gunn fabricated the mounts himself. Used steel brackets from damaged aircraft. Welded them into the nose structure, bolted the guns in place. 4 guns in an upper row, 4 in a lower row, angled slightly inward so all 8 firing cones converged at 500 feet. The ammunition feed was harder. Each gun needed a belt feed system. Gunn adapted feed chutes from destroyed aircraft, ran them back into the fuselage where ammunition boxes would be stored. Each gun would carry 2,000 rounds. Total ammunition load, 16,000 rounds, about 3,000 pounds. The entire modification added nearly 4,000 pounds to the nose of the aircraft. That created a catastrophic problem. The A-20's center of gravity was balanced for its original configuration. Adding 4,000 pounds to the nose shifted the center of gravity forward. Way forward. The aircraft would be nose-heavy, hard to control, possibly unflyable. Gunn compensated by adding ballast to the tail. Lead weights, extra ammunition in rear storage. Anything heavy. He moved equipment rearward, shifted fuel tanks, recalculated the balance point. It took 3 weeks of work. By early September 1942, the A-20 was ready. 8.50 caliber machine guns pointing forward. Trigger control wired to the pilot's yoke. All guns fired simultaneously with one button press. Gunn test-fired it on the ground. The sound was incredible. All 8 guns hammering at once, 6,000 rounds per minute combined. The recoil pushed the aircraft backward against the wheel chocks. Spent brass piled up in golden heaps. The noise echoed across Port Moresby loud enough to wake half the base. General Kenny heard about it, came to see what Gunn was doing. Kenny looked at the modified A-20, looked at the 8 machine guns, looked at Gunn, asked one question. Does it work? Gunn said he didn't know yet. Needed to test it in combat. Kenny said, test it. If it works, build more. That was all the authorization Gunn needed. September 12, 1942. 0630 hours. Dobodura Airfield. 6 A-20 Havocs sat on the flight line, engines warming up. All 6 were Gunn's modifications. 8 forward-firing .50 caliber machine guns in each nose. Total of 48 machine guns among the formation. The target was Buna Airfield, Japanese-controlled, about 120 miles northwest. Intelligence reported 18 Japanese fighters on the ground, numerous anti-aircraft positions, garrison of about 400 men. The mission was simple. Fly in low. Suppress anti-aircraft guns with machine gun fire. Destroy as many aircraft as possible. Gunn was flying the lead A-20. He was 43 years old, too old for this. But nobody else had flown this configuration before. If it failed, if the modifications caused the aircraft to crash, Gunn wanted to be the one flying it. They took off at 0630. Formation of 6, flying low, under the Japanese radar coverage. The flight took 90 minutes. They approached Buna at 5,000 feet, enough altitude to see the airfield, low enough to stay under most radar. Gunn could see the Japanese fighters parked in neat rows. Zeros, maybe a dozen of them, easy targets. He pushed the nose down, dove toward the airfield. The other 5 A-20s followed. Altitude dropped. 4,000 feet, 3,000 feet, 2,000 feet. Japanese anti-aircraft opened fire. Black puffs of flak appeared around the formation. 40mm cannons trying to track them. Gunn leveled off at 500 feet, lined up on the anti-aircraft positions, pressed the trigger. 8.50 caliber machine guns fired simultaneously. The sound was like thunder inside the cockpit. The aircraft shuddered from recoil. Tracers reached out in bright yellow streams, converging on the anti-aircraft guns. Gunn saw the rounds impact. Dirt exploding around the gun positions. Men diving for cover. guns tearing apart under the impact of 50 bullets per second. The anti-aircraft fire stopped. Gunn pulled up slightly, aimed at the parked fighters, pressed the trigger again, held it down. 5 seconds of continuous fire, 500 rounds in 5 seconds, all 8 guns hammering. The Zeros came apart, wings ripping off, fuselages puncturing, fuel tanks exploding, fires spreading across the flight line. Gunn flew through the smoke and flames, pulled up hard, climbed away from the airfield. Behind him, the other 5 A-20s made their runs. Same tactic: dive low, suppress anti-aircraft, strafe the aircraft, climb out. The entire attack lasted 7 minutes. When they returned to Dobadura at 1000 hours, Gunn climbed out of the cockpit. His hands were shaking. His flight suit was soaked with sweat. But all 6 A-20s had returned without damage. The post-mission reconnaissance photos showed 8 Japanese fighters destroyed on the ground. Multiple anti-aircraft positions demolished. The Japanese evacuated Buna airfield for 2 days afterward. 0 American losses. General Kenny saw the results and made an immediate decision. He ordered Gunn to start modifying B-25 Mitchells the same way. The B-25 was bigger than the A-20, had more space in the nose, could carry more guns, more ammunition. Gunn started work on the first B-25 strafer the next day. The B-25 modification was harder than the A-20. The B-25's nose was larger, heavier, more structurally complex. Removing it entirely destabilized the aircraft. Gunn had to completely redesign the forward fuselage structure. He worked with a team now, trusted mechanics. Men who'd seen the Buna results wanted to be part of it. They removed the glass bombardier nose, fabricated a solid metal replacement, mounted 8.50 caliber machine guns in a pattern optimized for convergence at 500 feet. But 8 guns weren't enough. Gunn decided to add more guns along the fuselage sides, 4 more .50 calibers, 2 on each side, firing forward at slight angles. 12 machine guns total in some aircraft. Others got 10. A few experimental versions got 14. The ammunition load became massive. Each gun carried 2,000 to 3,000 rounds. Total ammunition weight, 3,500 to 4,500 pounds, depending on configuration. The modifications created handling problems. The aircraft was nose-heavy on takeoff, hard to rotate. Gunn compensated with tail ballast and recalculated takeoff procedures. The recoil when all guns fired was severe, literally pushed the nose down. Pilots had to pull back hard on the yoke to keep level flight while firing. Gunn tested a 75mm cannon in one experimental version. The recoil was catastrophic. One shot and the aircraft pitched down violently, nearly crashed. Gunn removed the 75mm cannon, went back to machine guns only. By December 1942, Gunn had modified enough B-25's to equip the 91st Bomb Squadron, 16 aircraft, all strafers, all mounting at least 8 forward-firing .50 caliber machine guns. The squadron's kill ratio improved immediately. In January 1943, they sank 3 Japanese cargo ships using the new low-level strafing and skip bombing technique. Skip bombing was Gunn's other innovation. Release bombs from 50 feet altitude while flying at high speed. The bombs skipped across the water like stones, detonated against the side of the ship. From 50 feet, the Japanese had no time to maneuver, no time to dodge. The bombs hit before they could react. And with 8.50 caliber machine guns sweeping the deck first, the Japanese anti-aircraft gunners were dead before they could shoot back. The tactic was devastating. By late February 1943, American intelligence reported a major Japanese convoy forming at Rabaul. 8 transports, 4 destroyers, carrying 6,900 troops and 3 months of supplies to Lae, New Guinea. General Kenny saw the intelligence and immediately began planning. This would be the test. This would prove whether Gunn's modifications could change the war. On March 2, 1943, the Japanese convoy left Rabaul. On March 3, 1943, Gunn's B-25 strafers would attack. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea. March 3, 1943, 0800 hours. 16 B-25 strafers, 10 B-17 Flying Fortresses, 12 A-20 Havocs, 8 P-38 Lightning fighters for air cover, 46 American aircraft hunting 8 Japanese transports and 4 destroyers. The convoy was 150 miles northwest of Port Moresby, steaming toward Leh at 10 knots. Formation sailing. Destroyers on the perimeter. Transports in the center. 6,900 Japanese soldiers aboard. Enough ammunition and supplies to continue fighting in New Guinea for 3 more months. The American plan was coordinated. B-17s would attack first from altitude, disrupting the formation and distracting anti-aircraft gunners. Then the B-25 strafers would come in low, suppressing anti-aircraft fire with machine guns and hitting ships with skip bombs. A-20s would follow, finishing off damaged ships. P-38s would provide air cover against Japanese fighters. At 0815, the B-17s arrived overhead at 10,500 feet. The Japanese saw them coming. Anti-aircraft guns opened fire. Black clouds of flak filled the sky. The B-17s dropped their bombs. Most missed, but a few hit. The destroyer Ugiri took damage. The transport Tatuta Maru was set on fire. The convoy formation broke apart, ships scattering in different directions, trying to evade. That's when the B-25 strafers arrived. 0830 hours. 16 B-25 Mitchells came in at wavetop height, approaching at 200 miles per hour, low enough that the ships didn't see them until they were 2 miles out. Too late to maneuver, too late to organize anti-aircraft fire. Major Alan Mitchell led the first flight. His B-25 had 10 forward-firing .50 caliber machine guns. He'd named the aircraft Dirty Dora. Mitchell picked his target. Kyokusei Maru, the lead transport. 6,000 tons. Flagship of the convoy. He lined up. Altitude 200 feet. Speed 220 miles per hour. Range closed to 1,000 feet. He pressed the trigger. 10 machine guns fired simultaneously. 7,500 rounds per minute combined. Tracers reached out in bright streams, walking up the side of the ship. The effect was instantaneous. The ship's superstructure exploded under the impact. Glass shattered. Metal tore apart. Anti-aircraft guns were ripped from their mounts. Mitchell held the trigger down. 5 seconds of continuous fire. 600 rounds in 5 seconds. Sweeping across the deck like a saw blade. Men died. Anti-aircraft gunners were cut down at their posts. Sailors running for cover were caught in the open. Mitchell released 2 500-pound bombs. Skip bombing technique. The bombs hit the water 50 feet from the ship. Skipped like stones, slammed into the hull at waterline level. Both bombs detonated. The Kyokusei Maru shuddered. A massive explosion tore open its side. Water poured in. The ship began listing immediately. Mitchell pulled up, climbed away. Behind him, 15 more B-25s were lining up their runs. The next 5 minutes were carnage. B-25 after B-25 made strafing runs on the convoy. Each aircraft carried 16,000 to 24,000 rounds. Each run lasted 5 to 7 seconds. Each run put hundreds of bullets into a single ship. The Japanese anti-aircraft guns couldn't respond fast enough. By the time gunners acquired a target, the B-25 was already past, climbing away, and the next B-25 was starting its run. The combined firepower was overwhelming. 16 aircraft, 160 forward-firing machine guns total. When all 16 fired simultaneously, they were putting out 120,000 rounds per minute. The sky was solid tracers. At 0842, the Kyokusei Maru sank, capsized and went down stern first. Hundreds of men in the water, screaming for rescue that wouldn't come. At 0850, 3 more transports were on fire and sinking. Tatutomaru, Nakamaru, Tayomaru. The destroyer Ugiri tried to fight back. Its 5-inch guns tracked a B-25. Fired, missed. A different B-25 came in from the side, raked the destroyer's deck with machine gun fire, dropped skip bombs. The Ugiri exploded and sank in less than 3 minutes. At 900, 5 of the 8 transports were gone. 2 destroyers were sinking. The A-20 Havocs arrived at 0845, joined the attack. 12 more aircraft with 8 forward-firing guns each. The water around the convoy was white with spray, from bullets impacting at hundreds per second. The Japanese convoy was dying. Some American pilots made multiple passes, came back around, strafed the same ship again. Others attacked ships that were already sinking, shooting survivors in the water. The official record doesn't talk much about that part, but the Japanese survivors talked about it afterward. Described American aircraft, strafing lifeboats, shooting men swimming in the water. War is ugly. This was uglier than most. At 0905, Japanese fighters finally arrived from Rabaul. 15 A6M0s, too late to save the convoy. The P-38 Lightnings intercepted them at 15,000 feet. Shot down 2 Zeros in the first pass. The rest fled. By 9:30, the battle was over. All 8 Japanese transports were sunk or sinking. 3 of the 4 destroyers were gone. The 4th, Amagiri, was heavily damaged and limping back to Rabaul. 6,900 Japanese soldiers had been aboard the convoy. About 3,400 died in the ships or drowned. Another 1,000 were killed in the water by strafing aircraft. Only about 2,700 were rescued by the remaining destroyer and submarines sent from Rabaul. American losses: 3 aircraft, 1 B-17, 1 A-20, 1 B-25. All shot down by anti-aircraft fire, not by fighters. 13 American aircrew killed. The kill ratio was obscene. 8 Japanese ships sunk for 3 American aircraft lost. Nearly 4,000 Japanese dead for 13 Americans dead. General MacArthur called it a disaster for the Japanese and a triumph for American forces. He was right. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea changed the Pacific War. The Japanese never again attempted a surface convoy in daylight in the Southwest Pacific. From March 1943 onward, all Japanese resupply missions ran at night, using fast destroyers in Tokyo Express runs or relied on submarines. The Japanese Navy had learned a lesson it would never forget. American aircraft could sink anything that floated, and it was all because of Paul Pappy Gunn's unauthorized modifications. The Japanese knew something had changed, but they didn't know what. After the Bismarck Sea, Japanese commanders studied the attack reports, tried to understand how the Americans had sunk 8 ships in 2 hours. Lieutenant Katsuo Nakajima was a Japanese naval aviation officer stationed at Rabaul. He received radio transmissions during the battle, listened to the convoy commander's desperate calls for help. Years later, in a post-war interview, Nakajima described what he heard. The first report said American bombers were attacking from high altitude. Normal attack. We expected the convoy to maneuver and avoid most bombs. Then the transmissions changed. The convoy commander reported low-altitude aircraft approaching at extreme speed. Then machine gun fire. Massive machine gun fire. Ships reporting severe damage to superstructure and anti-aircraft positions. Then nothing. Ship after ship went silent. We sent fighters, but by the time they arrived, the convoy was gone. All of it. 16 ships in 2 hours. We couldn't believe it. We thought the reports were exaggerated, but reconnaissance confirmed it. Every ship sunk. A complete massacre. The Japanese tried to determine what weapon the Americans had used. They examined wreckage from downed B-25's, looked for new equipment, new weapons. They found nothing obvious. The B-25's looked identical to previous models on the outside. Same engines, same wings, same fuselage. What they couldn't see was the modification hidden inside the nose. The 8.50 caliber machine guns that looked like original equipment. Even if they'd found the guns, they might not have understood the significance. It wasn't a new weapon, it was just more of an old weapon, positioned in a way nobody had thought to position it before. But that simple modification was killing their sailors. Japanese commanders tried to adapt. They increased anti-aircraft armament on ships, added more 40mm cannons, more 20mm cannons, doubled the number of gunners. It didn't help. The American strafers came in so low and so fast that gunners had 2 to 3 seconds to acquire, track, and shoot. Not enough time. By the time they fired, the B-25 was past, and their own ship was shredded. Some Japanese naval officers proposed avoiding daylight shipping entirely. Admiral Yamamoto agreed. After Bismarck Sea, all major troop movements in the Southwest Pacific would happen at night, or not at all. The psychological impact was significant. For 2 years, Japanese forces had controlled the sea lanes, had moved troops and supplies wherever they wanted. After Bismarck Sea, Japanese sailors were terrified of daylight convoys, refused to sail except under cover of darkness. The Japanese Navy went from hunters to hunted, and it all came down to 8 machine guns that nobody was supposed to install. The modification never received official approval during the war. General Kenny quietly authorized Gunn to continue converting B-25's in March 1943, after Bismarck Sea, but no formal documentation was ever filed. As far as the official Army Air Force records were concerned, the strafer conversions didn't exist. Wright Field, the engineering headquarters, didn't learn about the modifications until April 1943, when a maintenance inspector noticed inconsistent armament configurations during a routine audit. The inspector wrote a report, sent it up the chain of command. The report sat on desks for 3 weeks, while officers debated what to do. The modifications violated regulations, but they were working. B-25 strafers had better kill ratios than any other anti-ship aircraft in the theater. Pilots were surviving. Ships were sinking. The question wasn't whether the modifications helped. The question was whether to court-martial the mechanic who'd installed them without authorization, or quietly pretend they'd been approved all along. In the end, pragmatism won. In May 1943, the Army Air Force officially authorized field modifications to B-25's for forward-firing armament. The authorization was carefully worded to sound like it had been planned all along, not an after-the-fact approval of unauthorized changes. North American Aviation, the manufacturer of the B-25, sent engineers to Port Moresby in June 1943 to examine Gunn's modifications. They measured gun mounts, studied ammunition feed systems, calculated center of gravity changes. Their conclusion? The modifications were safe and effective. Should have been part of the original design. North American integrated similar modifications into the B-25G and B-25H models that entered production in late 1943. The factory versions had cleaner installations, better engineering, but the basic concept was identical to what Gunn had welded together in a hangar in New Guinea. 1,000 B-25H strafers were eventually produced, each with 12 forward-firing .50 caliber machine guns. Some even got the 75mm cannon, though it never worked properly. But Gunn never received official credit in North American's documentation. The engineering reports attributed the strafer concept to field observations and combat experience analysis. Gunn's name didn't appear anywhere. He didn't care. He wasn't doing it for recognition. He was doing it to kill Japanese. Because somewhere in Manila, his wife and 4 children were still prisoners. Paul Pappy Gunn flew 63 combat missions during the war. He was hit by enemy fire 9 times, received 9 Purple Hearts, also received the Silver Star, Distinguished Flying Cross twice, Legion of Merit, Air Medal. In October 1944, during an attack on Tacloban airfield in the Philippines, a white phosphorus bomb fragment hit Gunn in the left shoulder. The wound was severe, left his arm partially paralyzed. He was evacuated to Australia for medical treatment. He stayed in Australia for 5 months, recovering, angry that he couldn't fly, couldn't fight. In February 1945, General Douglas MacArthur personally liberated the Santo Tomas prison camp in Manila. Polly Gunn and all 4 children were inside. They'd survived 3 years of internment. Barely. They were malnourished, sick, traumatized, but alive. MacArthur arranged for them to be flown to Australia, reunited with Pappy in a hospital in Brisbane. Gunn saw his wife and children for the first time in 3 years. Polly had lost 40 pounds. The kids had grown up in a prison camp. Nathan, the youngest, was 7 years old. He barely remembered his father. They spent 2 months together in Australia while Gunn finished recovery. In April 1945, Gunn returned to duty, but the war was nearly over. He flew a few more missions, mostly reconnaissance. Nothing like the desperate combat of 1943. The war ended in August 1945. Gunn retired from the Army Air Force in June 1948 as a colonel. The shoulder wound had ended his combat career. He returned to the Philippines, rebuilt Philippine Airlines. By 1950, PAL was flying routes across the Pacific. On October 11, 1957, 4 days before his 58th birthday, Gunn was piloting a Beechcraft D-18 through a storm over the Philippines. The same type of aircraft he'd flown before the war. The same type he'd escaped in on Christmas Eve 1941. The storm caught the aircraft. It went down near Baguio. No survivors. Paul Pappy Gunn was buried at Barrancas National Cemetery at Naval Air Station, Pensacola, Florida. Full military honors. His obituary mentioned his service in World War II as an aircraft mechanic and pilot. It listed his medals. It mentioned Philippine Airlines. It did not mention that he'd revolutionized aerial warfare. Did not mention the strafer modifications. Did not mention that he'd invented a tactic that sank hundreds of Japanese ships and saved thousands of American lives. In 1991, a military historian researching B-25 modifications found references to Gunn's conversions in maintenance logs from Port Moresby. The historian estimated that the strafer modifications directly resulted in the sinking of 312 Japanese ships during the war and may have saved 80 to 100 American pilots' lives. Gunn's son Nathan wrote a book about his father in 2014, called it Indestructible. The title fit. Today, several B-25 strafers are preserved in museums. The National Museum of the Pacific War in Texas has one. The Commemorative Air Force flies one at air shows. When you see them, look at the nose. 8 machine guns pointing forward. Simple, obvious in hindsight. But in 1942, it was revolutionary. That's how innovation actually happens in war. Not through official channels or engineering committees, through mechanics and pilots who see problems, find solutions, and don't wait for permission to save lives. Paul Pappy Gunn saw that American pilots were dying following doctrine that didn't work. He broke regulations to give them a fighting chance. And in doing so, he changed the war. If you found this story as compelling as we did, please take a moment to like this video. It helps us share more forgotten stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to stay connected with these untold histories. Each one matters. Each one deserves to be remembered. And we'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment below telling us where you're watching from. Our community spans from Texas to Tasmania. From veterans to history enthusiasts, You're part of something special here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for keeping these stories alive.